I'm a woman telling my own story in America, and I feel it when I think about that December drive. I wanted one calm Christmas for once. Not a loud one, not a tense one, just a simple week at my lakeside house with warm food and quiet rooms. I had built that place into my safe spot, bill by bill, and I believed that if I worked hard enough, the holiday would finally feel gentle. I thought I could make peace by making everything perfect alone. For days I prepared like the world depended on it. In Madison, I spread decorations across my living room floor and tested every string of lights. I bought soft white bulbs for $31 and a pine wreath for $18. I wrapped gifts in plain paper and tied them with green twine so they looked calm instead of flashy. I cooked ahead, baked pasta, brown sugar rolls, and potato soup because I wanted to arrive and only have to reheat, not rush. I packed a cooler, tucked cookies into tins, and taped my checklist to the lid. My lakeside house outside Duluth isn't huge, but it has always felt like proof that I could make a life of my own. The water there looks dark and steady, and the winter air feels sharp and clean. I bought the place after years of saving and working extra hours, and I remember closing day clearly. My hands sweating, my smile too wide, my pen scratching my name like it was a vow. Last summer I paid $2,700 for new windows. In the fall I spent $540 fixing the porch steps after a storm loosened the boards. I kept my plan mostly to myself. I told my friend Jasmine from work and she texted back, "Protect your joy." She understands my family. My mother, Elaine, likes to know everything, and when she asks questions she doesn't really ask, she presses. My father, Victor, talks about family like it's a law. And my younger sister, Mara, has a sharp tongue and a habit of using it for sport. I didn't invite them and I didn't announce my trip, but I didn't think I had to hide it either. On the morning I left, the sky was pale and the air had that dry winter bite. I loaded my car until it smelled like cinnamon, plastic bins, and wrapping paper. I slid my house folder into the glove box, the deed copy, insurance papers, and a few receipts, because I'm the kind of woman who keeps proof even when she shouldn't have to. On my fridge was a postcard magnet from Europe, and I tapped it once and whispered, "Later." Then I drove north. The road felt like a slow exhale. I sang along to old songs and watched the landscape change from busy streets to open fields. I stopped once for gas and coffee. The cashier, Owen, wished me Christmas. Then I drove on, imagining my house waiting for me like a friend who never asked me to prove myself. As I got closer to the lake, the world quieted down. Snow softened the edges of everything and the trees stood tall. I pictured myself opening the door, setting down my bags, and turning on the fireplace. I pictured hanging lights along the porch rail and watching them glow against the water at night. I even pictured sitting at my table with soup and a book, hearing nothing but wind and the tick of the kitchen clock. For a moment I felt hopeful in a clean, quiet way. I pulled into my gravel driveway just before dusk. My porch light came on, but it looked too bright, like the bulb had been replaced. I told myself not to overthink it. I carried the first bag of food up the steps, set it down, and reached for my keys. The metal was cold against my fingers. I slid my key into the lock and it stopped halfway. I tried again, slower. Still nothing. The key wouldn't turn and the door wouldn't give. I leaned in and looked closer and my stomach dropped hard. The lock was different. The old one had a tiny scratch at the bottom from when I dropped my keys on the concrete last year. This one was smooth and shiny, like it had never belonged to me. I knocked once, then twice, then harder, and I called out my name. I heard movement inside, soft footsteps, a faint laugh, the sound of a mug set down. A curtain shifted in the front window, and my heart started beating like it was trying to warn me. The door opened a crack and there stood Mara, wearing my flannel robe like she'd always owned it. Behind her I saw the glow of my living room lamp, the edge of my sofa, and my parents standing comfortably in my space as if it was theirs. Mara's eyes slid over me and she smiled, small and mean. "Go away, nobody wants a fool like you here," she said, and my parents laughed behind her like they were sharing a joke. Heat rushed into my face, but my voice came out steady. "This is my house," I said. My father's laugh turned into a short sound. My mother lifted her mug. Mara pushed the door toward me, slow and sure, and the gap of warm light narrowed until it was only a thin line. I stood there with my bags at my feet, my food cooling in the winter air, and my hands trembling in a way I couldn't stop. The latch clicked, and the silence after it felt heavier than the snow. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stepped down one stair, pulled my phone out with fingers that felt numb, and stared at the screen until the numbers stopped shaking. Then I dialed 911 because I knew with a cold kind of certainty that if I didn't protect myself right then nobody else would. I kept the phone tight to my ear as if that alone could hold me together. My voice shook when I spoke, but I forced the words out anyway because I could feel my family's laughter behind the door trying to shrink me into silence. "I'm at my lakeside house near Duluth," I told the dispatcher. "My family changed the lock. They're inside. They're trying to throw me out of my own home." The dispatcher didn't sound surprised or angry. She sounded trained, steady, like a person holding a handrail in a storm. She asked for my name, my address, whether anyone had threatened me and whether there were weapons. I answered each question slowly like I was stepping on stones across a river. I gave my name, the street, the color of my car in the driveway, and I said, "No weapons that I know of," even though my sister's mouth had always felt like one. She asked if I could prove the house was mine. I swallowed and looked toward my car because I suddenly felt silly for packing my house papers the way I always did. "Yes," I said. "I have my driver's license. I have documents in my glove box. I can show you receipts too." Came out like a list, neat and stiff. I mentioned the things that felt real and plain. I'd bought firewood for $392 and I'd just spent $216 on groceries for Christmas meals. I told her I had photos on my phone from last summer, me on the porch steps with fresh paint on my jeans. The dispatcher said officers were on the way and told me to stay outside where I could be seen, to keep distance from the door and to call back if anything changed. When I ended the call, the quiet hit me like cold water. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone, and my fingers felt numb from standing there with the wind moving off the lake. I set my grocery bags closer to the wall, out of the snow as if I could still protect the Christmas I'd planned. Then I hugged my coat around myself and stared at my own front door, trying to understand how a lock could make a person feel homeless in 1 second. From inside the house came another burst of laughter, louder this time, like someone had turned the volume up on purpose. I heard my father's voice, Victor, floating through the wood, and my mother Elaine's high laugh answering it. I heard my sister Mara talking fast the way she does when she wants to sound important. They were using my living room, my couch, my lamp, my heat, and I was outside like a stranger. I wanted to pound on the door again to scream that this was wrong, but I knew the moment I acted wild they would point at me and say, "See? This is why we did it." So I stood still. I watched my breath turn into fog and drift away, and I told myself over and over to stay calm. I tried to focus on small things so I wouldn't fall apart. The lake was dark and flat behind the trees. The porch boards creaked under my boots. A little string of holiday lights I'd hung last year still dangled by the window, one bulb broken, the rest dull because nobody had plugged them in. I thought about how I'd planned to replace those bulbs, how I'd even bought a new box for $14. The thought made me ache because it reminded me how simple my plan had been. I didn't want revenge. I wanted cocoa and quiet. I wanted to sit at my table and feel safe. Minutes crawled by like they were heavy. My phone screen dimmed and I tapped it awake again and again. Then far down the road I saw headlights sweep across the snow. 2 police cars turned into my drive, tires crunching on the gravel. The red and blue lights flashed against the trees and across my porch, making the snow look like it was changing colors. My chest tightened with a strange mix of relief and shame, because part of me still wanted to believe I should solve this without help. But another part of me, the stronger part, whispered that I had done the right thing. A tall officer stepped out first. His name tag read Officer Nolan Briggs. He had a winter cap pulled low and a careful look, like he was taking in every detail. Beside him came a woman officer with steady eyes and a calm face, Sergeant Raina Lowell. She didn't rush toward the door. She came straight to me like she could see I was the one standing alone in the cold. "Ma'am," she said, "are you the caller?" I nodded and my throat tightened so much I could only manage, "Yes." They asked me to explain what happened. I told them the truth in plain words. "I drove here with food and decorations," I said. "My key doesn't work because the lock has been changed. My sister opened the door and told me to go away. My parents are inside with her. This house is mine." Officer Briggs asked how I knew the lock was changed, and I pointed to it and described the scratch that used to be there. Sergeant Lowell asked if I lived here full-time or part-time. "Part-time," I said, "but I own it. I pay the bills." My voice wobbled and I hated that it did, but I kept going. I walked them to my car and opened the glove box with fingers that wouldn't cooperate. My folder was there exactly where I kept it. I handed them papers and Sergeant Lowell read them with the kind of focus that made me feel protected. Then I showed my driver's license and the photos on my phone, including a picture of the old lock from a repair last year. I didn't realize I'd taken that photo until I needed it, and when I found it, it felt like the universe had handed me a rope. Sergeant Lowell looked up and nodded once. She gave the papers back gently and said, "Okay. We're going to speak with them." The two officers walked up the porch steps together and I stayed behind them, close enough to hear but far enough to be safe. Officer Briggs knocked and announced, "Police Department. Please come to the door." He said it clearly, not loud, not rude, just firm. For a moment there was silence and I could almost picture them inside, stunned, scrambling to decide what mask to wear. Then the door opened wider and my sister Mara appeared again. Her confidence faltered when she saw uniforms. Her eyes flicked to me like a blade, but she didn't smile this time. My father, Victor, stepped up behind her, shoulders squared like he was about to argue with the sky. "This is family business," he said, waving a hand like he could wave the police away. My mother Elaine stood a little farther back, holding her mug, watching like she was waiting to see which side would win. Sergeant Lowell didn't move an inch. "This is a property issue and an unlawful lockout," she said, steady as stone. "She is the legal owner. You changed the lock and refused to let her enter." My father's face reddened. "She's overreacting," he snapped. "She's always dramatic." The words hit me because they were so familiar. That's what they always said when I asked for respect, like respect was a childish thing to want. Officer Briggs asked them to step outside and speak with him. Mara refused at first and said, "She doesn't even live here," like that erased my name from my own deed. Sergeant Lowell repeated the request, clearer and colder. My mother tried to laugh then, the way she laughed earlier, like she could charm the situation into bending. But nobody laughed back. The air changed. Even the porch felt different, like the wood itself was listening. They still refused. My father started arguing louder. Mara started shouting names at me again, ugly words meant to make me flinch. I didn't answer. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to feed their story. Sergeant Lowell warned them once, then twice, that they needed to cooperate. When they continued to resist, the officers moved in with calm speed, not angry, just final. Watching my sister's wrists go into cuffs felt unreal, like I had stepped out of my life and into a scene on television. My parents looked shocked, not because they had done nothing, but because consequences were happening to them. My mother's mouth opened and closed like she couldn't find the right excuse. My father tried one last time to talk his way out, but Officer Briggs was already guiding him down the steps. As they were led toward the cars, Mara twisted her head toward me and hissed, "You'll regret this." Her eyes were full of poison and pride, like she couldn't imagine being wrong. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. In that moment I understood something simple and heavy. They had been treating me like I was nothing for a long time, and I had kept trying to earn a place in their hearts by being quiet and useful. Standing there on my own porch with my own proof in my hands and the police lights fading across the snow, I felt a line form inside me. Not a line of anger, but a line of truth. I didn't call the police because I wanted to punish my family. I called because I wanted my life back. And when the car doors closed and the driveway went quiet again, I realized I was done acting like their cruelty was normal, and I was done pretending that being family meant they could take what was mine and laugh while doing it. After the police cars left, my driveway went dark again, but my chest still felt loud. I stood on the porch of my lakeside house outside Traverse City, staring at the door like it might change its mind and lock me out all over again. The cold air smelled like pine and snow, and I hated that my own home now felt like a place I had to win back. I held my new keys so tight my fingers hurt, then I forced myself to breathe and step inside. The living room looked normal at first, but it didn't feel normal. The lamp was on even though I always leave it off when I'm away. A blanket was folded wrong on my couch. One of my mugs sat on the table with a coffee stain dried in a ring, like someone had been sitting there for hours, acting like they belonged. Nothing was smashed, but everything felt touched, and that was enough to make my skin crawl. I walked through each room slowly, checking windows, checking drawers, checking corners like my piece might be hiding somewhere. That night I didn't cook the meals I had worked so hard to prepare. I couldn't stand the thought of eating Christmas food, while my hands were still shaking. I made tea instead and sat at my kitchen table, listening to the wind push against the house. A locksmith named Mateo Rios had come earlier to replace the lock and add a stronger deadbolt, and I'd paid him $470. When he tested it, the click sounded firm and clean like a promise. Still, I checked it again before bed, then checked it again after I brushed my teeth as if fear could sneak in through a crack. In the morning, my phone started buzzing like it was angry with me. The first voicemail was from my father, Grant. His voice was hard and neat, like he was reading rules from a paper. He said I had embarrassed them. He said I made them look bad. He said family doesn't call the police on family. I listened once, then deleted it. The next voicemail was from my mother, Lorraine, and she sounded softer, but the words were sharp underneath. She said, "We're your parents, like that should erase what they did." She said I was being cruel, like I had stolen something from them instead of protecting what was mine. Then my sister, Bianca, called from a number I didn't know. She left a message full of poison, talking fast and laughing in the wrong places. She said I always acted like I was better than everyone. She said I deserved to be alone if I wanted to play the victim. When I heard her laugh, my stomach turned. It wasn't just anger. It was enjoyment. Like my pain was entertainment. For the rest of the week, I didn't answer a single call. I didn't text. I didn't defend myself. I knew that if I opened even a small door, they would push it wide and drag me back into the same old fight where I ended up apologizing for getting hurt. So I stayed silent on purpose. I turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, and when unknown numbers rang, I let them ring until they stopped. Living in my house that week felt strange, like I was renting my own life. I kept the curtains closed at night. I jumped at small sounds. I couldn't relax on my couch without imagining my family sitting there, laughing behind my back. I tried to decorate once. I pulled out a box of lights I'd bought for $29, but my hands froze halfway through. I put the lights back like they were heavy. On the third day, I called a lawyer named Harper Quinn. I told her everything in simple order. The changed lock, the words at the door, the way they refused to leave. She didn't ask what I did to cause it. She didn't make it smaller. She said, "You have rights and you used them." Her fee was $1,300 and paying it felt like buying a fence for my mind. Somewhere in that week I understood something that hurt but also freed me. I had spent years trying to earn kindness from people who treated kindness like weakness. I kept thinking if I stayed patient enough they would finally respect me. But respect doesn't grow in a place where people enjoy humiliating you. That is not love. That is control. By the end of the week, I stood at my sink looking out at the lake and knew the truth. I didn't feel safe in my own home anymore, not because of strangers but because of my family. So I made a decision that felt like grief and relief at the same time. I decided to sell the house. I called a real estate agent named Celeste Marino. She walked through the rooms, looked at the view and said it would sell fast. When she asked if I was sure, I said yes without shaking. I wasn't running away from the house. I was walking toward a life where my key worked, my door opened and nobody laughed at me from the inside. Selling the house felt like cutting a rope that had been tied too tight around my life. I didn't expect it to feel so physical, like my chest was finally allowed to expand. The lakeside house had been my dream and my proof, but after what my family did, it also became a place where I kept replaying the same moment. My key failing, the door closing, their laughter floating through the wood. I knew I could repaint walls and replace locks, but I couldn't scrub that memory out of the air. So I chose something I had avoided for years. I chose myself. The sale moved faster than I thought it would. My agent, Celeste Marino, brought people through in neat little groups, and I walked outside during each showing, standing near the water and listening to strangers admire the view like it had never broken my heart. I signed papers at my kitchen table, the same table where I once imagined Christmas dinner, and my hands stayed steady even when my throat didn't. When the final offer was accepted, I sat in my car for a long time and stared at my own front window, trying to feel one last wave of love for the place without letting it pull me back. Closing day arrived gray and clean, with snow packed along the edges of the road like a white border. I met the buyer in an office in Milwaukee and everything about the room felt plain. Beige walls, bright lights, a pot of coffee that smelled burnt. The buyer was a man named Declan Rowe and he shook my hand like he was greeting a coworker, not taking the biggest thing I had ever owned. He wasn't rude. He was simply neutral, and that neutrality was oddly comforting. For him it was a business moment. For me it was a door closing the right way, gently with my choice behind it. I signed my name again and again until the letters stopped looking like letters. I watched the notary stamp the pages, and the sound of that stamp felt like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. When it was done, Celeste slid a copy of the documents toward me and smiled. You did good, she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't celebrate. I just felt quiet, like the loudest part of my life had finally lowered its voice. After fees, costs, and taxes, I still walked away with enough to start over. I made a simple plan on a piece of paper because planning is how I stay calm. I set aside $18,000 for a fresh beginning, and I promised myself I would not spend it trying to fix people who didn't want to change. I paid off a small bill that had been hanging over me. I kept money for a move, and I tucked the rest away like a seed I refused to crush. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, not because I had more but because I had less holding on to me. Packing was stranger than I expected. I thought it would feel like defeat, but it didn't. Felt like sorting truth. I didn't take everything. I took what felt like me. I wrapped my grandmother's quilt in a clean sheet. I packed one small box of ornaments. My favorites, the ones that made me smile instead of ache. I took my notebook, the one I write in when my mind gets too loud, and I slid it into my carry-on like it was a passport. I let go of the heavy things that had become symbols instead of comfort. I didn't tell my family my plans. I didn't call to announce anything. I didn't offer a goodbye speech. I had spent years giving them too many chances and too many words. This time I gave them silence. I blocked a few numbers. I changed my email password. I forwarded my mail. I handled my life like a woman closing windows before a storm, not because she's scared but because she's learned. A week later I flew to Honolulu, Hawaii. The moment the plane doors opened, warm air touched my face like a hand saying, "You're safe now." The sky looked larger there and the light felt different. Softer, brighter, less tense. I stood outside the airport for a second, just breathing, like I had been holding my breath for years and only now remembered how to let it go. I rented a small place near the water. Nothing fancy, just clean and simple, with a tiny porch and space for peace. The first night I sat on the floor because I didn't have furniture yet, and I ate takeout from a paper box like it was a feast. The next day I went to a second-hand shop and bought a chair for $95 and a small lamp for $28. When I turned that lamp on, the little pool of light it made felt like mine in a way the lake house no longer could. Nobody could twist it into a joke. Nobody could tell me to leave. I started building a new routine with gentle steps. In the mornings I walked along the shore and watched the waves roll in and out like steady breathing. I bought fruit from a market and smiled at the cashier, a woman named Mina Calder, who always said, "Have a good day, honey," like she meant it. I found a cafe where the barista, Luke Vance, learned my order and didn't ask questions about my past. Small kindnesses began to stack up like stones, forming a path I could actually trust. Some evenings I sat on my porch and watched the sun sink into the ocean like a slow, glowing coin. The sky would turn orange, then pink, then purple, and every time it happened I felt surprised, like beauty was something I had forgotten I was allowed to have. I thought about Europe once, the way people do, like a postcard in the mind. Pretty, distant, not urgent. But I didn't want faraway dreams. I wanted real calm. I wanted the kind of life where my keys worked, where my home welcomed me, where love did not come with cruelty. My family tried, of course. Messages came through from new numbers, from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, from people who wanted me to be the bigger person. I didn't bite. I didn't explain. I didn't argue. I knew the pattern too well. They would push until I reacted, then they would call my reaction the problem. So I kept my boundary quiet and firm. No speeches. No fights. Just no. When December came again, I surprised myself by decorating. Not big, not perfect, just enough to make the room feel warm. I hung a small string of lights along the porch rail, and the soft glow made my little place look like it was smiling. I set out my favorite ornaments in a bowl, not on a tree, just where I could see them. I made cocoa and sat in my chair with my notebook on my lap. And for the first Christmas in a long time, I didn't decorate to prove anything. I didn't cook to earn anyone's kindness. I didn't set a table for people who had laughed while hurting me. I did it for myself. As I could. Because I was finally learning that a home isn't just a building in America. It's the place where your heart doesn't have to brace for the next insult. It's the place where you can unlock the door and walk in without fear. And in Hawaii, with the ocean breathing in the dark and my porch lights glowing softly, I finally felt like my life belonged to me.